Sermon of the Week, Civilization, based on the book Lamentations. You know, babe, we're right back where we started, he said. How do you mean, dear? Spirit said to her husband. These humans have all but abandoned me. I give them everything, and look where we are. A 1,000,000-man march, the Babylonian desert. They thought it was hot in Judea. Wait till they get there, he said. No, dear, get riled up. Don't get riled up again. You know what happens, she said. But it keeps happening, he said, slamming his fist down on the glass dinner table. His action produced another long crack in the glass tabletop. In fact, the tabletop was filled with many cracks, all stemming from his anger. Spirit wanted to fix it, something she could do with the blink of an eye, but he wouldn't let her. We must be patient, dear. Surely the tribes of Judah and Benjamin will see the error of their ways. Not every country on that small planet can keep on self-destruction. Maybe this new guy, what's his name? Nebuchadnezzar, her husband prompted. Yes, maybe this new king can turn this country and his newfound slaves back toward being civilized again, she said with very little confidence. Nah, he's just like all the rest. Once he realizes he is the head of the world, he'll morph into the evil, uncivilized ways of all the rest of them. I guess you're right. We have been here before, and I fear we'll be here again and again. You know, it began way back in that Eden, something I should have never created. But it is the masterpiece of the universe, dear. He nodded, but then slammed his fist down on the table again. This time only a small new crack appeared. You know, in Eden we started with 2. How long did that last? Maybe 100 years. Then on to Noah in 2348 BC. How many civilized people were left on the earth then? 8, she said softly. Then on to Abraham. How many did he march out of that evil place called Ur with? Maybe 100, she said. I doubt that. I doubt there were that many civilians in his party. He chuckled at his choice of words. She put her soft, beautiful hands on his, now weathered ones. The smile was soon off his face. Then Sodom. 4 out of 1,000,000. No, 3. Lot's wife, his voice trailed off. But Joseph, she prompted. Yeah, he left maybe 100 real believers, really civilized civilians in Canaan. But Moses had that 1,000,000-man march out of Egypt. They all believed. Briefly. The golden calf. Remember that fiasco? As I was writing down the 10 Commandments on the stone tablets, the 1,000,000 men, including Aaron of all people, were building that animal. And I was proven right. By the time they finally arrived at Canaan's door, only 2 trusted me enough to want to even march into their new uncivilized land and convert it to civilization. 2! He shouted. She squeezed his hands tightly. She admired her husband's patience. But she had far more than he did. Baby, let's change the subject, shall we? She said, sliding her perfect derriere onto his lap. No. Then on to Israel and Canaan. That time there were thousands who practiced civilization. The prophets, King David, King Solomon. But then we have civil war. Those 10 northern tribes didn't last long, did they? When did they finally succumb to their evil, destructive ways? Assyria took control of them in 722 BC. Oh, yes. And they were even more uncivilized than their captives. Well, Judah hung in there for a while. Hezekiah, Josiah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, maybe a few thousand stayed the course, he said. The course, she asked. Yeah, I know, maybe 1,000, but I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. After all, I created them, he said. Maybe you do that too often, she said. Her comment surprised him. She was always the one who took the side of the humans. Maybe I should try to be more like the crazy gods these humans worship. Ra, Baal, Zeus. Zeus, she queried. Oh, sorry, he's one coming up yet, he said. Where? She asked. Greece, he said. I can hardly wait. Maybe if I was more like them, that have far less patience than me. They kill and sacrifice humans at the drop of a hat, at their whim. They even kill one another. Their gods have no life, but humans worship them without question. Maybe it's because I'm too hard on humans, he said a bit more pensively. Maybe you aren't too hard on humans. They're too hard on you. Look at your hands. They're up. He pulled them away from hers. Well, now they are on their way to Babylon, of all places, he said. Why didn't you send them back to Egypt? She queried. I'm not sure. I just thought maybe this would open more of their eyes. I bet it will. I would guess that about 1,000 of them still really believe in civilization. Believe in you, the one true God, she said, taking his hands again. I wish. At least, at last count, there are 14. Jeremiah, few priests, few of their families. That's it? He nodded. Honey, are you nearly down to the 8 in Noah's day? You better get busy and do something. Otherwise, this whole human race, the one we have sweated over for 3,000 years, will go by the wayside. I don't know what else to do, he said, shaking his bearded head. You better send them some more angels or prophets or something, she urged. Well, Jeremiah is solid. I don't think he will break, and some of his priest friends, I think they will hold on until at least part of the share of the million get tired of slavery and want to return to civilization. Taking an awful chance. Long odds, she said. All life's that way. Live it right, you'll survive and prosper. Live it wrong, and you'll not survive. I'll give Jeremiah and his boys all the help I can give them, he said. You better, she said. Luke and his boys already think I'm doing too much. They think any of my meddling is unfair, he said somewhat forlornly. No, she said, now raising her voice. Our children deserve, no, require every assistance we can provide. He was taken aback, but then a wry smile crept across his face. Well, you better get to it. I've just been reading 5 sonnets written by the guy you call solid, Jeremiah. Oh? He calls them lamentations, 5 of them. From what I read, he thinks there's no hope for humanity. He thinks it all is over. Had my eyes on a couple other guys for a while now. Both of them show promise. I think I'll try and work with them. What 2 guys? I thought you said Jeremiah was the only solid. One is Ezekiel. The other is Daniel. Daniel is the other one. I think they might be who we need. He scratched his graying beard, something he often did when new ideas came into his head. Well, you better get to it, she said. This Jeremiah of yours may not be solid for long. With that, the 2 got up and headed for their respective offices. The man God is referring to in the above conversation, Jeremiah, was born in 650 BC and began prophesying, that is to say, he was an active prophet beginning in 629 BC. This time King Josiah was on the Judean throne and would, in about 621 BC, begin massive reform in his realm. Idol worship was essentially outlawed. Everyone was required to worship the one true God. But in this country of some 1 million people, it's very likely that did not really happen. Outwardly it may have, but I doubt it happened everywhere. Changing religions in a country or even a community has been the precursor to many, many wars. God, of course, saw this lack of change, one which would most certainly lead to the downfall of Judea as a sovereign nation, and thus threaten anyone worshiping him, the one true God. The true God that actually created them all. At the time of Noah, only 8 true worshippers of God existed on the planet. At the time of the Exodus from Egypt, only a handful actually were solid believers. In fact, reviewing the events at Sinai, when Aaron made a golden calf, the world may have been down to only 1 believer. King David and King Solomon had righted the ship, and there were a lot of solid believers, but after their deaths, things headed back down the slippery slope. God knew he had to find some help, some solid believers, or humanity might not survive the 600 years when his plan was to send his son to save the humanity from utter extinction. This plan was to send Christ, his son, to earth in 4 BC. I wonder what would have happened if God had not been able to find Jeremiah. But of course, God did not sit idly by and watch things go completely to pieces. After all, he had more than a vested interest in humans. He created them in his image. They were, as it were, a reflection of him. There is debate as to whether God needed humanity to survive. If they did not, would it destroy his reputation? Would the universe think he was not capable of creating good people or things? Or did he really not need to create humans and have them survive? As it says in Genesis 1:1, or at least intimates that God created the earth and humanity for his pleasure, and maybe a demonstration to the universe of his ability and right to rule. The debate is likely beyond the capability of the human mind to understand fully, but I am of the opinion that though God doesn't need us, he will protect and preserve us. It may be like a collector. Humans don't need to collect things, whether it be art or jewelry, cars, dolls, pottery, whatever. But humans are collectors. They enjoy collecting things, and they are determined to protect and preserve and show off their collections. Maybe God just wanted to show off a little, give the universe something else to enjoy, but at the same time he knew there would be a price to pay. He knew he would have to insure his collection. I'm sure he knew, but I'm also sure he did not know the price of insurance would be very high. If he had, would he have created us in the first place? Someday I want to hear him lecture on that subject, though even then I probably won't understand it. In Genesis 2:20 we read, "But for Adam there was not found an helpmeet for him." I guess maybe the translation should be helpmate. In any event, Adam likely was lonesome. Maybe God was lonesome also, so he decided to create some new being he could relate to. I'm sure by this time he was tired of the angels questioning his right to rule the universe. Or maybe God was bored. This I doubt, based on our observation of the rapid expansion of our universe. So what was our God doing as his planet was going down the tube? Was he like Nero, fiddling while Rome burned? No, he most certainly was not. He was hunting for more solid guys to help him out, to help Israel out, to try and preserve them as a nation and not let them fall into complacency and their old evil ways. Already half of Israel was gone, kaput. Assyria took over the northern kingdom of 10 tribes in 722 BC. 100 years had passed since then, and finally, at the urging of a few solid men, King Josiah undertook reforms. These were designed to right the ship of Judah. And who did God find? He did find a few solid individuals. Jeremiah, of course, began prophesying in 630 BC. Zephaniah began his prophecy in 630 BC. Habakkuk in 612 BC, Obadiah in 586 BC, and of course Daniel in 606 BC. That's 5 solid guys, 5 true believers, 5 prophets, all of whom have books named after them in your Bible. Yet God was suspicious this gang of 5 would not be enough to stem the tide of evil bearing down on his beloved humanity. A lot was going on in the world at this time in addition to the rise of Babylon as the dominant world power. Pharaoh Necho was ruling Egypt, soon to be Babylon's weak sister. Aesop was spinning the fables in Greece. Tarquinius Priscus was controlling Rome, and Ting Vang was running China. Was God just letting all these boys do their own thing? No, indeed. A fascinating piece of history demonstrates this. In 585 BC, the Lydians of western Turkey, with the capital of Sardis, and the Medians of Iran were locked in a 5-year war. As it happens, they were now in their 6th year of the war, and a battle was raging. Earlier that year, a guy by the name of Thales predicted that there would be a solar eclipse on the very day this battle was taking place, May 28, 585 BC. Herodotus gives us the story, and to this day no one knows how Thales came about his prediction. The science of the time surely was not sufficient to predict solar eclipses. In fact, it was another 100 years before man discovered a solar eclipse was even caused by the moon coming between the earth and the sun. Even today, there is no known predictive cycle that can be reliably counted on to predict an eclipse for a given location. But sure enough, on May 28, 585 BC, a full solar eclipse took place. The two armies were locked in a struggle. They noticed light was beginning to fade, and soon the sun was completely blocked by the moon. Both armies stopped fighting and stared up at the black sun. Presently the two leaders met in the center of the field, and they called a truce. The 5-year war was over. Was God involved, or was this just another coincidence? You decide. I'm sure there are other evidences, such as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego surviving a fiery furnace, and Daniel, a den of lions. Alas, would all this be enough to right the ship, to make humanity realize God's way of truth and love was their only chance of survival? Sadly, the Gang of Five and all of God's other interventions were not enough. And yes, the kingdom of Babylon would not buy in either. Within 70 years, Cyrus the Median would overthrow them as predicted by Daniel and embellished by the words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Why then does Jeremiah write a 5-chapter book of Lamentations? What does he hope to accomplish by it? The kingdom of Judah was on its last legs by the turn of the 6th century before Christ. King Josiah, arguably Israel's last good king, died in battle with Egypt at Megiddo in 609 BC. The kingly succession moved ahead until the first siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in 597 BC. At that time, he installed Judah's last king, Zedekiah, as a puppet and lifted the siege. 11 years later, Nebuchadnezzar had finally run out of patience with Zedekiah, who had entered into an alliance with Egypt. He returned, set siege to the city, and after 2 years finally entered and destroyed the city. He took all the valuables in Solomon's temple to Babylon. Jeremiah, who had foretold all these events, was thrown into a well by some of Zedekiah's supporters, but was rescued and was released from prison when the Babylonians razed Jerusalem in 587 BC. Jeremiah soon fled to Egypt, where he died. It is probably at this time that he began to write the book of Lamentations. As one of God's solid boys, yet Israeli at heart, he loved his country and his family, just like any good citizen would do. And as he watched his country go down the drain, his heart began to ache. All of his roots were with Israel and its smallest tribe, Benjamin. He could not believe what was happening. His countrymen were committing acts of evil beyond even their own capabilities. The corruption, graft, murder, treason, and sacrifice of children, no less to little gods of wood, were rampant and beyond anything Jeremiah could believe humanity of any ilk would or could do. Yet it continued to happen right up until Nebuchadnezzar arrived on the doorstep of the now misnamed Holy City. Jeremiah was a prophet, and he was also a writer. His communications with God likely were occasionally heated. How could God disown his people, his country, his creation? God may have given him answers, but when you read the book of Lamentations, I believe the answers God gave Jeremiah were not satisfactory. Unlike us, we ask God for answers, but often don't like them or agree with them. We ask for something, maybe a job or a friendship or a new car or healing. When there's no answer or the answer is not what we ask for or expect, we right away blame God for not doing what we ask. We always think he should get everything we ask for, but I submit our lives are imperfect. God pleads with us every day to change this or that, something we seldom do. Then, of course, we repeat our errors or sin over and over. But we still expect God to give us whatever we want. Taking a look at Israel's history, I think it compares well to our own situations. Oh, maybe we aren't murdering anyone, but we all cut corners on good and evil. I repeat, we all cut corners. Unkindness, untruthfulness, deceit, dishonesty, and greed come to mind. Israel by now had built up a vast record of the above and much more. She became a people when Abraham moved from Ur to Canaan in 1921 BC. It took God 1,335 years of rebellious living to finally give up on her. So you see, despite your 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 years of cutting corners, God is not ready to give up on you. He often has to communicate by not answering your prayer, but he won't abandon you. However, Jeremiah now saw the big picture. God had finally had all even he could take of Israel and finally took her off the world map. Jeremiah, seeing this, argued with God to show mercy on his people. But arguing with the Almighty, as we see repeatedly, is a losing proposition. The interesting part is that when argument ends, even we agree that God was right and we were wrong. Jeremiah had not grasped that fact when he wrote Lamentations, believing God was permanently and forever abandoning his people. That would not happen until they killed him, some 615 years down the line. Let's read a few words of Jeremiah. How doth the city sit solitary that was full of people? How is she become as a widow that was great among nations? He uses exclamation marks to punctuate his astonishment. Lamentations 1:1. For these things I weep. Mine eye runneth down with water, because the Comforter that should relieve my soul is far from me. Lamentations 1:16. Surely against me he has turned. He turneth his hand against me all the day. Lamentations 3:3. The Lord has accomplished his fury. He hath poured out his fierce anger, and hath kindled a fire in Zion, and it hath devoured the foundations thereof. Lamentations 4:11. Turn thou unto us, thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old, but thou hast utterly rejected us. Thou art very wroth against us. Lamentations 5:21 and 22. The last verses are the end of Jeremiah's little book. He is sad that God has departed, realizes why, and believes God has forever abandoned his people. But as history continues to unfold, we find this is not true. I expect Jeremiah died believing what he wrote, or maybe he was another that God chose to take to heaven, so Jeremiah too could watch the remarkable plan of salvation unfold over the following centuries. If Moses and Elijah are in heaven now, I expect Jeremiah, along with many other solid guys, are also there, watching humanity struggle into the 21st and likely the last century of the earth as we know it. Babe, have you been watching how my boys are doing? He asked. He then yawned. Yeah, how is it going down there on that little planet you call Earth? Where did you come up with that name anyway? You should have named it Evil or just Death. He ignored her sarcasm. That Ezekiel is a great guy, and Daniel, well, he's essentially ruling the Medes and the Persians. Don't forget my girl Esther. She essentially rules too. Spirit reminded her husband that women were equal. I know, but Daniel, can you believe how solid that guy is? You know, I think it's about time. Time for what? Time to forgive and forget, he said. Again? She almost shouted. They're hopeless. They're all hopeless. You'll regret that idea? Well, I'm ready to try again. You know, I love... His voice broke. She came over to him and hugged him tightly. Soon they were both in tears. Honey, I'm with you, whatever you think. Okay, let's try again. I'll give some information to Daniel, and then down the line you wangle that little queen of yours to... I'll ever get the Persians to rebuild the temple at Jerusalem. A big grin came to her tear-stained face. What's her name again? Esther. She's one of the most beautiful of your creations. Agreed. You outdid yourself there. I thought Eve was, but Esther, she's even. But how are you going to get Jerusalem rebuilt? Esther is queen, but she's no builder, Spirit sighed. I got my eye on another solid guy, he said. Care to share? She asked, squirming on his lap. What's his name? Nehemiah.